I've been waiting to review this for a minute. Hey everyone, CW Music Reviews here. I am CW and this is going to be a music review of the new Radiohead album, A Moon-Shaped Pool. Radiohead, a band that pretty much needs no introductions. I'm pretty sure we're all familiar with them, but if you're not, seminal experimental rock group from the UK, featuring Tom York, Johnny Greenwood, Colin Greenwood, Ed O'Brien, and Philip Selway. These guys have pretty much laid their mark on the world of alternative and rock music. I feel it necessary to just kind of go through my opinion of each individual album relatively briefly. This is their worst album, but it's also still good. This is really good. This is fantastic. This is also fantastic. For an album that is essentially leftovers from Kid A, it's reworked and made incredibly well. It's really good, and it's also criminally underrated. It's really good, but also criminally overrated. It's better than Pablo Honey? So yeah, I was pretty excited for this new album since I am a Radiohead fan. And I feel like I was going to get what I was going to get when, around late April, they started doing some weird shit. For one, they sent flyers to like people that have been getting their newsletters that say, "Sing a song of sixpence that goes, burn the witch, we know where you live," which turns out to be lyrics for the song Burn the Witch. Then out of nowhere they just erased their entire internet history, disappearing completely if you want to be punny. And then they just dropped the single for Burn the Witch after a couple of teaser videos. It was like this upbeat art rock type song with like these orchestral strings going off that add to the upbeat atmosphere, all the while still remaining off kilter with this really dissonant bass and these like electronic beats that create a bright atmosphere in a way. It was certainly an interesting track that I didn't love on first 3 listens, but after giving this so many listens, I just can't help but this be one of my favorite tracks, with or without the album itself. Tom pretty much singing really well on this track. We know where you live. He's pretty much singing about groupthink, or in the context of the single, he's singing about groupthink. That following Friday, they then announced the album was coming out the following Sunday, and they also dropped another track called Daydreaming. This is easily one of the most beautiful ballads they've dropped in a while. Pretty much this laid-back piano piece that has a lot of tonal layers to it. There's like a bright variation within the chords that I like a lot as it goes into the middle of the track. There's also some backmasked vocals on the tail end that also is syncopated with the strings. It's breathtaking, this track, honestly. These singles definitely had me intrigued. These were also really varied tracks since they sound completely different stylistically. Burn the Witch being like 3.5 minutes, whereas Daydreaming is almost twice that long. So I was really intrigued with this album, and I decided to get a download for it and check it out. What did I think? This is easily one of my favorite Radiohead albums ever made. It's not as good as this or that, but it's still one of my top 5 easily. This album is about 11 tracks in length, about 52 or 53 minutes long. Each track has its own unique flavor to it. We get the first 2 tracks, Burn the Witch and Daydreaming, and they definitely kick the album off in a weird fashion. Then we get the track Deck's Dark, which has like some really jittery, off-kilter piano hanging in the background. And then eventually some electronic beats come in. There's some more serene piano that's dominating this really eerie atmosphere that's being created by this dissonance and jittering piano. The track builds incredibly well, certainly. It transitions incredibly well when more instrumentation, namely guitar, bass, drums, strings, so even some choral vocals. It definitely creates a really moody and really dark and melancholy atmosphere. That's the thing about this album that I have to note. In the context of every other album that Radiohead ever dropped, This is easily their most melancholy. Now, they've made some sad songs in the past, like No Surprises, How to Disappear Completely, as well as Fake Plastic Trees and Fade Out. But this is like loaded with sadness. The next track, Desert Island Disc, there's some nice acoustic guitar being used here. It certainly reminds me of like some Nick Drake stuff. Didn't really expect Radiohead to go back and actually use an acoustic guitar on an album. In a way, I thought this album was going to sound quite a bit like The King of Limbs, except a bit more fleshed out, but no, this is an animal of all its own. Anyway, this track, it certainly keeps its acoustic and really ballad-like atmosphere going with it, especially when bass and drum is being added. It really sounds kind of like a desert in the dark in a way. Like he's roaming out in the desert and I guess filled with introspection that I really like on this track. Then we get to one of my favorite tracks on the album, Full Stop. This track is dark as hell. It's got this nice ominous and crescendoing bass part. The drums seem really off in the distance and cacophonous. That adds to the darkness. Spidery and off-kilter guitar playing in the background. Tom's vocals kind of seem maybe a little off in the distance and really subdued in a way as all this stuff is going on, but it certainly adds to, like, I guess the passive-aggressive stuff that's going on here. Like, he's trying to hold everything in and he just finds it really difficult to do so, saying you messed up everything. And there's also some horns or string that come up. I can't tell which it is. It's probably horns in a way, but it certainly does this track well. What I do also like about this track is that it builds incredibly well. It certainly like keeps me engaged and really adds tension for the whole 6 minutes this track goes for. Then we get the shortest track on the album, Glass Eyes. It's a nice, gorgeous ballad track that I guess has a narrative about him talking to someone about where he's at in life and where he's trying to go from here, I guess. It's a really abstract track in a way, all the while Tom sings really direct. It sounds like he's writing a letter. It's a really string and heavy piano track once again. It certainly adds to the melancholy of the whole album, so I dig it. Then we get to one of my favorite tracks in the album, Identikit. One thing I do want to mention, the tail end of this track has a really lovely guitar solo from, I assume, Johnny Greenwood. It's been a minute since I heard Johnny do a guitar solo on an album for Radiohead, since he seemed to be more focused on doing soundtracks and conducting orchestras while the band was on hiatus. And that certainly seems to pop up numerous times on this whole album, which is cool. But yeah, this track, there's some nice upbeat guitar and bass here. There's like eerie vocals from Tom going off in the background as Tom himself is just singing over it and trying to once again hold himself in. But at this time, he just can't seem to. I love this really passionate refrain that Tom does on this track. Broken hearts make it rain. Broken hearts make it rain. The guitar just gets really dramatic and everything just really brightens up in a way as he's like feels liberated about this emotional experience, I guess. I also do dig the inclusion of some synth and choral vocals on this track that pop up. Then we get the track The Numbers, which has some really jazzy piano that opens the track. There's like some off-kilter effects being added to this intro, certainly. It's another acoustic guitar ballad type thing. In a way, this guitar playing kind of reminds me of something off of The Bends, or maybe something off of Amnesiac in a way, but it still sounds really fresh and really fits this album particularly. I do want to mention that a good chunk of these tracks are relatively old. In terms of composition, these tracks have existed long before this album, like Burn the Witch, Desert Island Disc, Identikit, as well as the closing track. There's another nice build on this track that I like a lot, especially when more instrumentation gets added and the strings once again sound really nice. There's like a lot of great string on this album. The track Present Tense, which is another stripped-back acoustic ballad that I like a lot, and it has one of my favorite lines on the entire record. Distance is like a weapon of self-defense. used against the present. There's some, I guess, maracas or some kind of shakers being used in the background. There's also some really eerie vocal echoes that I like a lot. But then we get to, I think, my least favorite track in the album. Tinker, Tailor, Soldier, Sailor, Rich Man, Poor Man, Thief. There's just something about these airy electronic beats that really just don't switch up at all that reminds me a little too much of like a throwaway track off a Kid A or something. The first half just really seems kind of patience testing in a way, but it's worth it pretty much, especially when like the best string parts on the entire record show up on this track. But then we get to the closing track, and easily my favorite track off the album, True Love Waits. I completely understand how people felt now when Nude showed up on In Rainbows, because this is just painstakingly melancholy and just tear-jerking. It closes off with this really soft and really somber piano ballad that in the middle of the track actually switches up in chords in a way that just really add layer to this track a lot. Tom sings incredibly emotional and really melancholy on this track, and it's just, oh man, it's indescribable what he does with this track and why this track is just amazing to me. So that's the quality of the record. There's no bad track or less than great track on this album. One thing I do want to mention, or at least this is a theory anyway, this is probably a breakup album. There's definitely a lot of regret, love on this album in terms of themes. Couple that with string parts that are so intricate that I can't help but think of Vona Cure by Bjork. This is definitely it. And it's not too far off a theory, seeing as Tom York has separated from his lover of about 25 years, close to 25 years. There's also like quite a few moments that seem to suggest that. For one, we got Daydreaming, which a lot of people theorize, and I agree, that the backmack vocals say half of my life. He's about close to 50 now, I think, and he spent like half of his life with this one woman, and it just falls apart. After that, the lyrics on Daydreaming seem to suggest that something has ended. And Burn the Witch, out the context of the album, it's a song about groupthink, but in the context of this album, this is like Tom's own low-flying panic attack before it snaps into Daydreaming, and he just feels this sense of melancholy all throughout the record. Tracks like Identikit, like I said, have that refrain where he says, broken hearts make it rain. Dex Dark seems to talk about this pool of the moon that seems to be the album title. That's really bestowing upon Tom the darkness that I guess he feels. On this album, he's not so bitter about all this as so much as he's accepting of it, and he's trying to process this kind of thing. Because from what I understand, he and she have split up amicably in a way. But he still feels this sense of loss and sense of regret over this instance. I think the biggest proof of that for me would be True Love Waits, which, from what Nigel Godrich has said, this track wasn't meant to exist in a studio until it felt like it had relevance and meaning to do so for Tom, and I think this is it. To pretty much conclude, I love the shit out of this album. There's like little to anything bad I can say about it. Lyrically and instrumentally, it's really melancholy, it's really heavy on the soul in a way. I think they pretty much came out with one of my favorite Radiohead albums to date, one of my top 5, and I didn't think that was going to happen. In my head, I thought Radiohead were going to at least put out another good album to go with the myriad of already really good albums. But no, they took all these tracks and really fleshed them out to what they could be. So if you are a Radiohead fan, check this album out. Buy the CD, buy the vinyl, you'll dig the shit out of this thing. I think if this truly is a breakup album, then Tom York, the man who can easily personify sadness and agony through his vocals and lyrics, have pretty much done what many of us have always wanted him and Radiohead to do in that regard. This album is a plus 2.8 out of plus 3. If you're not a Radiohead fan, give this a listen. Maybe you'll get into Radiohead this way. Actually, I have friends who have listened to this album that weren't that fond of Radiohead, but after listening to it, they are really intrigued with what Radiohead have been capable of before. But if you've given this album a listen, what did you think of it? Did you like this album? Did you dislike this album? What was your reasoning for that, and what should I consider listening to and reviewing next? CWD Music Reviews here, signing off.